Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're talking with Chad Bird, author of Your God is Too Glorious, Finding God in Most Unexpected Places. Chad has served as a pastor in the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, as an assistant professor of Hebrew and exegetical theology at Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and as a guest lecturer at Lutheran Theological Seminary in Novosibirsk, Siberia. He has contributed articles to the Lutheran Witness, Goffenstadt, Concordia Journal, Concordia Theological Quarterly, many other publications. He's the author of The Infant Priest, Christ Alone, and Night Driving. In addition to hosting ChadBird.com, he's a regular contributor to ChristHoldFast.org and 1517legacy.com. He lives in Texas. Chad Bird, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you very much. It's great to be on the show.
Chad, I like to take people back to the origins of what influences a young man, who influences a young man to answer the call to serve in ministry, and how did that play out in your life?
Sure. I was raised in a very devout family of the Southern Baptist denomination in the Bible Belt in the heart of Texas. We were one of those families that were in church every Sunday morning, every Sunday evening, every Wednesday evening a lot of times. And so my parents were both very committed Christians and had a tremendous influence on me growing up in that regard. Over time, especially during my high school years, I became much more interested in the scriptures, in theology, in the life of the church. And eventually went to a Christian college and worked my way toward a seminary as well. So it was from there that I went into the ministry of the church.
Was this something that you felt was, and I ask this question with all due respect, but I do believe that there are those who look at the ministry as a vocation and those who look at the ministry as a calling. And there's a very distinct, both by the fruit and by the growth and by the personal dedication of the pastor, minister, leadership to answering the call, as opposed to growing up where you related to a pastor or you feel the vocational pathway as opposed to the called pathway. What was that for you?
Honestly, I think it was a little bit of both. I certainly had the one aspect where I had the kind of the vocation, what you call the vocational understanding, but also over time developed what we sometimes refer to as this call or inner call or prompting of the Spirit to move in that direction. So it's hard for me to say it was one or the other. I think it was actually, in my case, a combination of the two.
How do you think, in retrospect, if you look at it, and I I'll give you kind of a comparison to base it on. I came to faith as a Jew at age 44. I was a senior executive with two major Fortune 100 companies. After several years after I came to faith, I was called to leave very high-level executive positions in corporate America and start a congregation in a city I had never been to, in a place I didn't know anybody. Okay, this was purely a calling, and the fruit of that calling was a ripe, luscious, prosperous in every aspect until I was betrayed. And when I was betrayed, that all went away. life for me, the rug was pulled out from under me and made me ask the question, was God in it to begin with, or was this just my enthusiasm? Was this just my exuberance as a believer? But a year after the betrayal, I took a sabbatical year, wrote a best-selling novel, and then launched a ministry that now is a global international television ministry, reaching hundreds of thousands, if not millions, around the world. So I still believe that God called refiner's fire and came out the other side sharper, brighter, cleaner, more pure and devoted. You've experienced things in your life which have caused a change in circumstance, but yet you're still writing about the Lord. You're still talking about the Lord. Therefore, it sounds to me as if your experience was more leaning towards the calling, because you're continuing in the ministry, no longer in the vocation of pastoring, but you are continuing the ministry. So is that how you might perceive that?
Yeah, that's with a few differences between our two situations. That is very much kind of the outline of what happened in my case as well. I served a congregation for a while, and then I was a professor at a seminary for about 5 years, and not as a result of someone's betrayal of me, but of my betrayal. The rug was pulled out underneath my feet, and like you, everything that I had worked to attain, I lost. And I began at that time really a 10-year process of God working in me and working me over and doing all the things that He does in order to bring me back to Himself. And so I've begun writing again, speaking again. I have 2 or 3 books out now. So what I've learned is that God continues to use us, to call us into His service, wherever we may be, whatever we may be doing. I have a regular secular job, and I do this in the mornings before I go to work. I do it on the weekends. So God is using me in both of those places in different ways in order to reach out to people, to spread His word, and to ultimately point people to Christ. And so, yeah, the calling has been there and always will be there, a calling which is always pushing me out of myself into the lives of others in order to bring them to Christ and to His gifts for us.
On a personal note, try to explain in words why you and I do what we do. I've never really asked anybody to do this before, but because of what you've been through, which parallels what I've been through, betrayal's betrayal. It means the enemy wedged himself into a situation that caused people of faith to turn, to be distracted from what they know to be right, but yet we are so totally human. Even Paul in shackles. What outward temptation could there be? But maybe a 6x6, maybe a 10x10, but shackled, still warred with the flesh, still warred inside of himself, and reminded us it doesn't matter whether or not you're locked in a cell in solitary confinement. There is this dual battle going on, a war between the sin nature and the Holy Spirit, and you hope at the end of the day that you are your wins outweigh your victories, even if it's 100 battles, even if it's 51 to 49. you want to come out ahead. All right, we have those days where we get up to bat and we strike out every time we get up to bat. But as we assess a lifetime, not a day, because this is, as so many have said, a marathon and not a sprint, our dedication to the Lord is hard to explain. Maybe you have words to explain to others how we could face the same adversities that the world faces. We're not immune as believers. Okay? We make errors, others make errors against us. We find ourselves in circumstances. We always ask the same question: how the heck did I get here? At some point, if you haven't asked yourself that question in a time of trouble, then you're not really examining the circumstances. But the question is why do we do what we do? And why, regardless of these Rock of Gibraltar boulders in our way, do we tend to persevere, press through, and find a way to stay the course on the other side of transgression or of obstacle?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer that I would point to is what Paul says in Galatians chapter 2. It's one of my favorite verses. In fact, it probably is my favorite verse in the New Testament anyway, where he says that I have been crucified with Christ, and so it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life that I live by faith in the Son of God. So ultimately, the reason that I keep going, the reason that I keep trying to do what I do, despite all the mistakes I've made, all the sins I've committed, all the losses that I've experienced, is because I am not my own. I was bought at a price. And the union that I have with Christ by being crucified and resurrected with him means that my life is no longer my own. It's no longer mine to do with what I wish. Instead, it's Christ's instrument through which he is working in order to demonstrate his strength in the midst of my weakness, his grace in the midst of my sin, his light in the midst of whatever darkness that I might be in. So the reason that we keep going on is not so much due to our own strength, because we know how faltering that is, but instead it's due to Christ's strength within us, the work of the Spirit within us, in which he is, as you said, refining us. He is making us more and more reliant upon him and less reliant upon ourselves, so that we begin to see ourselves as God truly sees us, as those who are incorporated into Christ, as those who understand their whole identity is built upon not what we do or even what is done to us, but instead what Jesus has accomplished for us and given to us.
Chad, when you and I resurfaced after our, let's call it our Midian years, praising God that they weren't 40 as they were for Moses.
Yes.
When we come out on the other side of this, we know that there are those who are going to look at us with the jaundiced eye and are going to put themselves above God, put themselves above the cross, and decide they will withhold forgiveness or reconciliation or restoration, even though God himself has assured us that we are restored, that we are reconciled, that we are forgiven. And the details don't matter. It doesn't matter whether or not you stole a pencil from the church yesterday or you murdered somebody today. Transgression against the Lord and God's law is transgression against the Lord and God's law. And we tend to make it hierarchical but yet there is a percentage of the body that does not forgive. Jesus talked quite clearly about those in his parable, the sheep and the goats. He spoke quite clearly about forgive so that you might be forgiven. I'm reminded of a passage that I read, and I've said it so many times, people probably think I'm the author, but I'm not. But people who cannot forgive have forgotten what they have been forgiven of. I think it takes a certain holy boldness and a certain true love of God to press through to the other side of our obstacles, because truly the blessing is on the other side of breakthrough. There's going to be obstacles. Your motivation for writing another book, and a lot of times you ask the artist, what was your inspiration, what was your motivation? But in your case, why do you, even though you have a different vocation now, why do you continue to go back to that call to share God with the world?
I think part of the reason is because I recognize that one of the gifts that God has given to me is the ability to write, and for years I did not. When I left the ministry and left my position at the seminary, I basically crawled into a hole for several years, and for lots of reasons, out of fear, out of shame, out of guilt, out of anger. But over time, and especially through the influence of some very special people in my life, I took my pen back out and I began to write again. But it wasn't just that I wanted to exercise this gift. The real motivation behind me writing this book and writing the other ones as well is that I see, not just in the world, but in the church, this incredible hunger for people to be given time and time and time again the good news of what Christ has accomplished for them in his life, death, and resurrection. I think so often in the church we treat the gospel as if it's sort of the starting point of the Christian life. So God saves you through the work of his Spirit and the Word, and he fills up your spiritual fuel tank, as it were, and then sends you on down the road. But the message that conveys is that the gospel is really only about the beginning of the Christian life, whereas in truth the gospel is all the Christian life. We never get away from the foot of the cross. We never grow out of our need for God's grace. And so the main motivation for me writing this book, is for writing everything else that I do, is to get people pointed toward the only truly good news that there is in the world, that they are reconciled to God in Christ, that they are justified in him, that he has borne all of our sins in his own body on the tree so that we might be pronounced clean and forgiven and holy and righteous in his sight. We can't get enough of that. We can't hear that often enough. And so what I try to do with everything that I write is to bring this to bear in people's lives in very tangible, in very real sorts of ways, so that they might realize who Christ is, what he's done for them, and then also who they are in him and what he continues to do in their lives. And so really it's what Paul says in Romans 1. He says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And so in all my writing, that's what I try to convey, is that I am not ashamed of the gospel, and that the church should never be ashamed of the gospel. Rather, we should keep that at the forefront of everything that we do. That, like Paul, we should say that we are determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified, so that we might bring people over and over and over to that cross, to those gifts, so that they can have the hope that they need in the midst of a life that is often very hard and seemingly hopeless.
You have come face to face with the best and the worst. I'm reminded of these are the best of times, and these are the worst of times.
Worst of times, yes. Charles Dickens, yes.
The agony and the ecstasy. As true believers, and I'm talking to an audience from Pakistan right now, to Israel, to Egypt, to India. We're prime time in that time of the world, and then we rebroadcast, so we're prime time around the world 24 hours a day. Therefore, we're talking to people who have faced in their lives tragedy, personal moral decisions, but we serve a God of restoration. And as we read the Bible, redemption was planned in an eternity past. We tend to read the Bible in Genesis in the beginning, but we say God has no beginning, so there must have been an eternity prior to the first words of the Bible that's in the past, an eternity past, where redemption was planned. Because God then gives us the Bible, which is redemption promised. Then we're given Jesus, which is redemption fulfilled. And then we're given this redemption for eternity upon his return. So the Bible can easily be summed up as a redemption planned, a redemption promised, a redemption fulfilled, a redemption sustained. It's about redemption. Do you feel that part of your heart, because you've personally gone through crisis, I've personally gone through crisis. My crisis was made public and known on the front pages, and it wasn't anything that I did. Praise God. But had it been something that I had done, I would still be in the same position of redemption. Redemption isn't, there's no levels of redemption. The redemption for the one who was it was done to, and redemption for the one who did it. There's no, it's universal. Okay? There's nothing you can do to separate yourself from the love of God. As a matter of fact, it's kind of interesting that Scripture says that no man can snatch you out of God's hand. If you are a literal reader of the Bible, as I am in Hebrew, Hebrew and English, and then the Paleo-Greek, I am a man, and therefore I am incapable of removing myself from the hand of God. We have to be inclusive. I find what you're saying very encouraging, and the reason I took you down this path is because we have at least 500,000 social media followers that follow this program, and all those others that don't identify, or they live in a country where they have no way to really identify with it, that God's plan of redemption is for you. Doesn't matter what you did. Doesn't matter where you did it. Doesn't matter how big it is. Just like I tell people, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. It is never too late to receive God's redemption. We're talking with Chad Bird, author of Your God is Too Glorious, Finding God in the Most Unexpected Places. When we come back, we're going to dig into the text of this book and hear more about Chad Bird's story. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Chad Bird, author of Your God is Too Glorious, Finding God in the Most Unexpected Places. Chad Bird, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
So you write a book with a subtitle, Finding God in the Most Unexpected Places. where do we expect to find God?
Well, I think that depends to some extent on the individual, but by and large, we tend to look for God in big places, in powerful places, in wealthy places, in influential places, in places that we connect with glory and awesomeness and all kinds of adjectives such as that. I mean, as a general rule,
you mean the mega church?
yeah, you're right. That's part of it. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
The bigger, the better, the bolder. That is where we really expect to see God doing his work. So if we find God in unexpected places, we're going to find him in those places where we see weakness, where we see smallness, where we see the unglorious, where we see the common and the ordinary, the everyday, the boring, the mundane. So we find God in these places which our reason, our experience, our culture, and to some extent churches tell us that God is and his best work are not to be found. So God kind of has a counterintuitive way of infiltrating our lives because he comes in ways that are just the opposite of what we would expect. I like to say that he hides himself beneath his opposite. So he comes in what seem to be very undivine sorts of ways. And what I do in the book is I unpack this in various ways through the chapters, whether that's coming in unusual people or things or places or activities. And I relate this then to our lives as believers and how God is at work in them as well.
We seemed to have missed a great message in Acts chapter 2. I often tell people that if we're using Acts chapter 2 as the model of the church, then why didn't we put a steeple on the upper room?
Right.
Because I hear everybody say we want to be the Acts chapter 2 church. We want to have fellowship together. We want to take care of people. We want to break bread together. We want to pray together. We want to have everything in common. We want God to add to our numbers daily, those being saved. And I say, then why did you put a steeple on the upper room? The salvations did not come from the people coming to the upper room. The salvations came when Peter came down preaching the gospel. 3,000 that day heard, 3,000 Jews, by the way, and then the next day 5,000 Jews, oh, by the way, came. We would consider that to be headline making in Christianity today.
Sure.
5,000 Jews come to faith at a stadium in Odessa or Nikolaev or in Kiev. Okay, earth-shattering. Sid Roth, Jonathan Bernis, kind of earth-shattering. But it wasn't so earth-shattering because we took this model of the upper room and we stuck a steeple on it. And we stopped doing the things of what? Meeting together. Where do they meet together? They met together daily in the courtyard outside the temple, doing one thing and one thing only: studying the apostles' teaching. That's what they did. And then they had fellowship. So small groups, they brought them home with them. They had intimacy. They had relationship. In your book, you talk about how God hiding in plain sight. You talk about friends in low places. Is this really the hidden message of the come as you are, find God where you are? He's everywhere, and if you're traveling in a foreign country and people don't point things out to you, you might miss them. Now we have the Fodor's Guide, if you will, in your new book. We don't mind going to the store. Oh, my family and I are taking a trip to Italy. Oh, yeah, get the Fodor's Guide to Italy. That's going to tell you everything you need to know to travel Italy. Or the Fodor's Guide to Israel. Oh, I'm going on a trip to Israel. What book do I need? Oh, you better get that Fodor's Guide to Israel. Well, as I read your book, I'm thinking to myself, this is the Fodor's Guide to the Kingdom. While you're on your trip through the kingdom, take a moment out and stop and listen to the wind rustle through the leaves and think to yourself, I cannot see the wind. I can see the effect of the wind, but I can't see the wind. But I believe in the wind because I see its effect. I have a person in my life that says they love me, and I feel their love, but I can't see their love because love is unseeable, but I believe it because I see the fruit of it. If somebody didn't explain to me a belief in the unseeable, in the intangible, I wouldn't have a guide to be able to appreciate where I could find evidence of the unseen realm seen. And this has become the Fodor's Guide to the unexpected places, the hidden places, the places that when you go to a city, people don't put in the guide because they're not popular, but they're kind of must-sees along the way if you really want to know the place you just visited. If you want to know about the place you just visited, you might as well just get an encyclopedia. But if you really want to know the people, and this is what I exacted from your book. You talk about friends in low places. Walk me through that chapter.
Yeah, this is a chapter where I examine some Old Testament stories and relate those to our lives, where you see God using people that you would never expect him to use. So we tend to think that it's the people in the high places with power, with influence, with wealth, who are really the ones who are blessed. They're the ones that God would use to accomplish whatever his will might be. But we see time and time again in the scriptures that God gravitates toward people who are in the low places. Oftentimes people who are actually anonymous, like the little slave girl that sent Naaman to the Holy Land to get cleansed of his leprosy. But these friends in low places are those that God is using in order that through them he might demonstrate his strength in the midst of their weakness. So it doesn't matter if it's a slave girl. It doesn't matter if it's a prostitute in the city of Jericho. It doesn't matter whether it's a slave or whether it's just a common laborer. It doesn't matter if it's the Hebrew midwives in Exodus. These people who are in the low places, these people who are overlooked and ignored and treated as if they really don't have anything to contribute, they're the ones that God tends to handpick in order to accomplish his will in people's lives, to work in his kingdom, to bring others to his saving message, and sometimes to accomplish victories that other people wouldn't be able to accomplish. So God is the kind of God who has friends in low places and low people and the overlooked and the underused of society. And I think that's such a great message for us today, because we tend to think that the people who really are the spiritual superstars are those whose names we all know. They're the megachurch pastors or whoever they might be. But God is always at work kind of behind the scenes. And he's at work in the homes of moms taking care of their children. He's at work in the farmer who's driving his John Deere, plowing the field. He's at work in the truck driver who's delivering freight. He's at work in all of these people's lives in order to use them as his mask behind which he can serve and love and forgive and do all the things that God does in our world. So that's what that chapter is all about. That rather than looking up to the high places, God looks to the low places. He uses his common people, and ordinary ways in order to accomplish his truly extraordinary work of bringing life into the world.
If you are a reader of the Bible, then you come to the realization that all the friends in the low places are the ones who were the lineage of Jesus.
Right. Matthew chapter 1, right, is full of that genealogy.
Right. Rahab, the prostitute, was the mother of Boaz. We love the story of Ruth. We just forget who his mama is because we don't want to talk about her because she was a prostitute.
Right, yes.
All right. We love Ruth. Oh, my goodness. We just adore Ruth. Ruth is the product of an incestuous relationship between Lot and his two daughters. She has no birthright whatsoever. She is born out of incest, and every generation of Moab was a fallen, incestuous, bankrupt, destined for destruction, and her restoration comes from being bound to and joined to the prostitute's son. This is a Harlequin novel. This is a bizarre set of events, but the reality of Scripture. And I believe this is the chapter that the underlying theme says, if you've read the Bible and you haven't found yourself in it, you being one of the people in the low places, then go back and read the Bible again, because if you read it long enough and hard enough, you're going to find yourself right there in the pages of the Bible, because you are who humanity is, and God He is the God of humanity. Quite interesting. I want to kind of fast forward through the book. We've got about a little bit less than 10 minutes in this segment. But you wrote a chapter called Learning About God in the Devil's Classroom. I guess in reality, in many ways we all do, unless we have what we might call parochial life, where God led it. I led a traditional Jewish life, which is it's not the devil's classroom. It's Judaism's classroom. Every now and then, God might be referred to, okay, as a footnote to what the great rabbis had to say, but certainly not the center of attention.
Right.
At least not in my 44 years in traditional Judaism. But how do you, or what message are you trying to share with us in learning about the devil, learning about God in the devil's classroom?
One of the major stories that I reference in that particular chapter is Paul's thorn in the flesh, which he calls a messenger of Satan. And what is most people are probably familiar with that particular section of Corinthians, where Paul asked 3 times for God to remove this thorn because he sees it as inhibiting, as painful, as holding him back. And 3 times God says no. And ultimately, the reason is because God says to him, "No, it's staying there because my power is made perfect in your weakness." And that's very significant for an understanding of what it means to learn about God in the devil's classroom, because very often we think that the temptations that we face, the afflictions of the devil that we suffer, are somehow ultimately bad. Well, no, certainly they are bad in a way, but they're also the means by which God is actually purifying us and drawing us closer to himself. One of the things I say in the book is that one of the purposes of temptation is not to prove how strong we are in our ability to resist it, but rather to reveal just how weak we are in our susceptibility to give into it. So one of the ways that God uses temptation is to reveal how little we can rely on ourselves and how much we have to lean on him. That's one of the ways that God uses the work of the devil in order to accomplish his own good in our lives. So whether it's temptation, whether it's a thorn in the flesh, whether it's a weakness that we suffer, whether it's a cross that we bear, whatever it is that we feel might be holding us back from this spiritual accomplishment that we might be seeking, is actually God's way of demonstrating that the worst thing we can do is to rely on ourselves if that keeps us from relying on him. So the more that we lean on ourselves and our own understanding, the less we're going to be leaning on Christ and his grace. So this classroom is where God teaches us how much we need him in our lives.
Many of your studies were in Hebrew, and
yes,
and you know how idiomatic Hebrew is. Imagine a young boy growing up in an Eastern European home learning English and looking at words as not able to learn to sight read, because that's not how you learn any other language. And so I was exposed to many other languages as a child, English being the one that I had to learn. So when I looked at words like independence, I didn't see it as a single word. I saw it as two words.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Because I had learned the word in. I had learned the word dependence.
Yes.
Joining the two together must have meant that there was a message. So Independence Day must be the day we declare that we are in dependence upon something. And so, so this was the way my brain was wired. I took the words because I had to learn them phonetically, and I had to break them down into their parts. Therefore, the word independent is two words. It may have been conjugated in common usage, but still in my 66-year-old mind. So we come to this point where we must become in dependence upon God, not independent of God. Well,
absolutely.
What was considered a learning disability in the 50s for me, because this was the only way I could process, has become the greatest gift given to me as I read the scriptures, because I read it in the Hebrew and in the English, and I see what they've done to it, and I go back into this separation of words and what the real meaning is, and this is exactly right. The devil's classroom would teach you that you're a self-made man, you are independent, you are free to think and do as you act, and to me, it's a reminder that yes, I am independent. I am in dependence upon something other than myself. And every time anybody ever says to me, "Oh, it's Independence Day," I go, "What a great day! This is like to me, this is like Easter. This is Resurrection Day. This is the day where you declare You get out there with your flags and your fireworks and you're shooting these things off saying, all right, man, I'm declaring for the whole world I'm in dependence on God. And they're looking at me and thinking, you're the craziest person I've ever met in my life. But you understanding Hebrew can completely relate to what I'm saying to you, is that the breakdown, the conjugation, or whatever that is, word entomology, there's some word for it and I don't know what it is, doesn't allow me to process English other than I would process, I'm still struggling with noun verb and the and the placement of the article.
Right.
In a sentence. All right, we've got less than 2 minutes. Who needs this book?
I think I think anyone could profit from this book, because whether they're a Christian, whether they're interested in Christianity, whether they're a Jew, whatever their background is, we are all wondering, implicitly or explicitly, we're wondering, whether we know it or not, where God is to be found. And this book is a guide through the scriptures in order to point us to where exactly he is. And ultimately he is in Christ. And Christ has hidden himself in all of these plain sight sort of people in places in order that he might be there for us, draw us to himself and make us his own. So I'd encourage anybody and everybody to pick it up.
I completely agree with you. As I told you, I think it is a handbook for the reality of where God resides, and it's taking the steeple off the upper room and saying, in your walk in the woods, in your waking up, at the moment you open your eyes, you realize that you actually heard before you saw, which was what stimulated this, or the perception of light, and all of a sudden your senses are being activated by God's creation. He set the sun, he set the stars, he brought the night, he did all those things. He's too glorious, and you make that statement in your title, your God is too glorious, finding God in the most unexpected places. Chad Bird, thank you for being with us here on Revealing the Truth and sharing your story with us.
You bet. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.